Right now, across more than 15 states, the atmosphere is loading itself like a coiled spring. Over 100 million people are standing in the path of what is shaping up to be one of the most active stretches of severe weather this country has seen in months. This is not a single storm. This is not a single day. This is a chain reaction, a storm train rolling out of the Great Plains, tearing through the Midwest, slamming into the Ohio Valley, and reaching all the way to cities like Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York. And the truly unsettling part is this. Today is only the beginning. What comes after today is, in some ways, even more dangerous. To understand why this is happening, you have to understand what's brewing in the atmosphere right now. A surface-based low-pressure system has settled in over the Great Plains, and it's combining with something meteorologists call steep lapse rates. In plain English, that means the air several thousand feet above the ground is cooling off fast, while the air near the surface stays warm and humid. That mismatch is rocket fuel for thunderstorms. When you add wind shear and the geography of the plains, that fuel doesn't just create rain showers. It creates supercells, the most violent and organized form of thunderstorm there is, capable of producing large hail, destructive straight-line winds, and tornadoes. At the very same time, on the opposite side of the country, a completely different mechanism is about to cause trouble. A fast-moving cold front is barreling toward the east coast. That front is going to punch through the warm, humid air sitting over the mid-Atlantic, and when cold air slams into warm air at speed, the result is a sudden eruption of strong to severe thunderstorms over some of the most densely populated real estate in America. So you have two separate severe weather machines running at the same time, one in the heartland and one on the coast, and they are both active today. But here's the detail almost nobody is talking about. This is not a one-day event that fades out tomorrow. Forecast models are already locking in on a second, and possibly even more dangerous, round of severe weather arriving later this week and stretching into early next week. The target zone for that second wave. The Great Plains, the Midwest, and the Ohio Valley, where every single category of severe weather, hail, wind, and tornadoes will be on the table once again. This is shaping up to be one of the most active June weather patterns in recent memory, and it is far from finished. Let's start with what is actually happening today, because today alone is a serious event. Forecasters have drawn 3 separate slight risk zones for severe weather. The first stretches in a wide band from New York City all the way down to Jackson, Mississippi. The second cuts from Dallas up toward Little Rock. The third sits out across the high plains. But layered on top of all 3 of those is something more alarming. A massive level 1 risk zone for severe weather running from Billings, Montana, all the way to New York City. Inside that zone, every hazard, hail, wind, and tornadoes is in play. The headline threat for today is damaging wind. Forecasters are warning of gusts up to 70 miles per hour, and this isn't going to be a quick hit-and-run storm. Multiple rounds of thunderstorms are expected to roll through over a full 12 to 24-hour stretch. That means if you live in the path of today's system, you're not looking at one round of bad weather, and then it's over. You're looking at wave after wave. Then there's the hail threat, and this is where things get genuinely dangerous for property and for anyone caught outside. Out across the high plains, in cities like Lubbock, Amarillo, Denver, and Rapid City, forecasters are warning of hail up to the size of baseballs. That is not an exaggeration for effect. Baseball-sized hail falls at speeds that can shatter windshields, cave in roofs, and seriously injure anyone unlucky enough to be caught in the open. Meanwhile, on the East Coast, in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and Richmond, the hail threat is smaller, closer to quarter size, but at the volume these storms are expected to produce, quarter-sized hail falling rapidly across a metro area still causes real damage to cars, roofs, and crops. And then there's the threat that always grabs the most attention, and for good reason: tornadoes. Today brings not 1, not 2, but 3 separate tornado risk zones. The first sits over the mid-Atlantic and interior Northeast, covering Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York City. These are some of the most densely populated metro areas in the entire country, and they are sitting under a tornado risk today. The second zone stretches from Nashville down toward Jackson, right through what's historically known as Dixie Alley, a region notorious for fast-moving, hard-to-see tornadoes that often form at night or in poor visibility. The third tornado risk sits out across the high plains, where the open terrain gives storms room to organize and rotate. Let's walk through how today is actually going to unfold, hour by hour, because the timing matters more than people realize. Right now, a large line of thunderstorms is already pushing through the Dallas area into Little Rock and Jonesboro. This line is producing damaging wind gusts and the potential for an isolated spin-up tornado. By late morning into early afternoon, this line should begin to weaken and fall apart. But here's the part that matters. When a line of storms collapses like that, it often leaves behind just enough leftover rotation in the atmosphere to spark something new. That leftover energy could be enough to support an isolated tornado or two later today across Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and southern Tennessee, the heart of Dixie Alley. The most dangerous window for that region looks to be later this afternoon into the evening, roughly from 3 o'clock until 10 o'clock at night, focused mainly south and east of Nashville. Damaging wind will be the primary threat there, but a tornado cannot be ruled out. It's important to understand the nature of this kind of severe weather day. The storms will be widespread and numerous, but the truly severe ones will be more scattered, hitting in pockets rather than blanketing the whole region. That means most of the storms passing through won't be dangerous, but the ones that are dangerous will hit hard, fast, and without much warning. As we move into the overnight hours and early Tuesday morning, some of these storms will continue to linger across the same general area before finally weakening. Meanwhile, over in the mid-Atlantic, the timeline looks different. Storms are expected to fire up just after lunchtime, the classic popcorn thunderstorm pattern, storms that pop up quickly in the afternoon heat and produce sudden downburst winds and large hail. A few of these storms could spin up brief, isolated tornadoes, especially as they push toward Washington, D.C. The window of highest tornado risk in this region looks to run from about 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the evening. After 8, most of the activity should weaken and drift offshore, though a few lingering thunderstorms could still affect parts of Virginia and North Carolina, with gusty winds even after the main threat passes. Out across the high plains, a different storm engine is at work, a phenomenon called upslope flow, where moist air gets pushed up and over rising terrain near the mountains, is going to provide extra lift in the atmosphere. That lift is expected to fire off several discrete supercells later this afternoon, roughly between 5 and 7 o'clock. The tornado environment out here is not considered especially favorable, but a quick, brief tornado touchdown cannot be ruled out. The bigger concern in this region will be damaging straight-line winds and large hail. If you live anywhere between Gordon, Nebraska, and Lamar, Colorado, this is the window to stay alert, and the activity here is expected to continue into the late evening and overnight hours. Now here's where the story changes, because Tuesday is not a calm down day. It's a continuation and, in some ways, an escalation, just shifted geographically. As we move into Tuesday, the severe weather risk holds steady across the Great Plains and the Midwest, while the East Coast and Dixie Alley quiet down considerably. A marginal threat sets up for Fargo and Sioux Falls, but the bigger concern is a large, slight risk zone, stretching from Denver and Fort Collins back to Wichita. In that corridor, the primary danger is significant damaging wind, the same kind of threat that produced a massive line of thunderstorms the night before, a line that tore through Kansas and ran all the way through Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Tuesday's version of that line is expected to be a bit smaller in scale, but damaging wind gusts will still be a serious concern across Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and even up into Nebraska. There's also a real risk of large to very large hail on Tuesday, especially closer to the Rocky Mountains, where storms tend to intensify quickly as they roll off the higher terrain. And there's a low-end tornado risk in the mix as well, one that forecasters believe could actually expand in the coming hours to include areas like Goodland, Kansas, and possibly even Scottsbluff, Nebraska. This is the part most people miss when they look at a severe weather outlook just once and move on. These risk zones are not fixed. They shift, expand, and sharpen as new data comes in, which means a region that looks like a low-end concern today could be staring down a much more serious threat by tomorrow. But the detail that should really catch your attention about Tuesday is what's brewing for the overnight hours heading into Wednesday. According to high-resolution model data, a much more potent storm system is expected to develop across the Central Plains, while areas farther east, like Dixie Alley and the East Coast, should stay relatively quiet. The center of gravity for severe weather on Tuesday shifts hard toward the Midwest and Central Plains. One specific model run is flashing a warning that deserves attention. It shows a large, intense line of thunderstorms developing near Wichita, just southwest of Kansas City, during the evening hours. This line is being modeled as producing wind gusts in the range of 80 to 100 miles per hour. Let that sink in for a moment. That is not far off from the wind speeds found in a moderate hurricane, except this would be happening in the middle of the country, hundreds of miles from any coastline, in the form of a fast-moving line of thunderstorms known as a mesoscale convective system. These systems are extremely common at the tail end of June and into July, and when they form with this kind of intensity, they can produce widespread, significant wind damage across an enormous area in a very short amount of time. If this particular model run holds true, the cities sitting in the bullseye would include Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Fayetteville, and even back toward Springfield. It's worth being honest here. This is one model run, and model runs change, but there's a deeper pattern worth paying attention to, because this would be the second powerful line of thunderstorms to roll through this same general region in roughly 24 hours. The night before already produced one major squall line. If another one forms on Tuesday night, that's not a coincidence. That's a sign that the atmosphere over Kansas, Oklahoma, and possibly Arkansas has locked into an unusually volatile setup, one capable of repeatedly generating destructive wind events night after night. For comparison, a separate forecast model, often considered more reliable for this type of setup, paints a similar but slightly different picture, starting that same line of thunderstorms over Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas instead. The exact starting point differs between models, but the conclusion both are pointing to is the same. A powerful, fast-moving line of severe thunderstorms is very likely to roll through this region late Tuesday night into early Wednesday morning. As we get closer to the event, forecasters expect the risk level in this zone could be upgraded even further, potentially into an enhanced risk category for damaging winds. Wednesday brings another round, slightly less intense but still significant. The Midwest stays in focus, with at least some isolated severe weather expected, especially across Wisconsin and back toward Minneapolis, where damaging winds, hail, and a low-end tornado risk will all be possible. The bigger concern on Wednesday shifts back toward the high plains and central plains, where new storms are expected to fire directly along the spine of the Rockies, again producing damaging winds and the possibility of an isolated tornado. Despite an official slight risk being issued for Wednesday, the overall threat level looks comparatively low. Thursday is expected to closely mirror Wednesday, with the same general regions seeing another round of scattered, isolated severe weather. And this is where the story takes its most serious turn, because heading into the weekend, the atmosphere is about to load up with an extraordinary amount of energy. A massive surge of unstable air is forecast to push into the northern plains. And this is the kind of setup meteorologists watch closely, because instability of this scale doesn't just produce ordinary thunderstorms. It produces the kind of environment where severe weather outbreaks happen. Saturday is expected to bring a real severe weather threat across the northern and central plains. But based on current data, the truly dangerous days appear to be Sunday and Monday. By Sunday, an enormous pool of instability is forecast to stretch from Kansas City all the way up to Bismarck, North Dakota. This corridor lines up with what forecasters consider the most favorable wind profile for tornado development, meaning the ingredients for organized, rotating supercells, the kind capable of producing significant tornadoes, will be sitting right on top of some heavily populated stretches of the Midwest. By Monday and Tuesday of next week, this volatile setup could expand even further into the broader Midwest. To put the scale of this instability in perspective, current data is showing values exceeding 6,000 joules per kilogram of energy available for storms a full week out from now. For anyone unfamiliar with that measurement, that number is, in a word, extreme. It represents an atmosphere absolutely loaded with the raw fuel needed for major thunderstorm development. Numbers anywhere close to that level typically only show up ahead of the most dangerous severe weather outbreaks of the year. But raw fuel alone doesn't guarantee disaster. This is the part that often gets lost in the excitement around big instability numbers. To turn that fuel into an actual tornado outbreak, you need more than heat and humidity. You need a strong area of low pressure and powerful low-level winds to provide the spin and lift that organizes thunderstorms into rotating supercells instead of just disorganized garden-variety storms. Without that spin, all that instability can fizzle out into nothing more than scattered, unremarkable storms. With it, you get the recipe for a real outbreak, and right now the pieces appear to be lining up. A significant storm system is forecast to push across the Pacific Northwest over the coming weekend, and as that system tracks eastward, it's expected to drag its low-pressure center and strong wind fields into the central United States, right around the same time all that explosive instability is sitting in place. Sunday currently looks like the day with the best chance of an actual outbreak of severe weather, because that's when forecasters expect overlapping strong low-level winds and intense upper-level winds, the exact combination needed to turn instability into organized, rotating, dangerous storms. Monday tells a different, more uncertain story, and this is the kind of detail that explains why forecasting more than a few days out is genuinely difficult. By Monday, that center of low pressure is expected to have moved well to the north, out of the United States entirely and into Saskatchewan and Alberta in Canada. Without that low-pressure center sitting nearby, the strongest low-level winds end up displaced too, with the best wind field settling closer to Minneapolis and Sioux Falls rather than the broader Midwest. With the main trigger positioned so far to the northwest, there's real uncertainty about whether the Midwest sees a major severe weather event on Monday, despite having one of the most unstable atmospheres of the entire season sitting right overhead. That's the unsettling irony of this forecast. The fuel could be there, fully loaded, and still not get ignited simply because the spark moved somewhere else. A separate major forecast model offers a complementary piece of the puzzle for the days leading up to that weekend stretch. According to this model, Friday could bring a pocket of severe weather into the Ohio Valley, driven by a small, weak area of low pressure. The tornado risk there looks low end, but damaging wind gusts remain a real possibility. Saturday, that same model suggests, could bring severe weather to parts of the northern plains, though there's genuine uncertainty right now about how strong that event will end up being, It could turn into a significant outbreak, or it could end up being a comparatively minor, low-end day. As of right now, nobody can say for certain which version of Saturday is going to play out. Sunday, according to this same model, will largely come down to the precise timing and positioning of the upper-level trough driving the whole system. Right now, the most likely outcome points toward more significant severe weather settling over the Dakotas. And as for Monday, this model currently shows comparatively little severe weather across the Midwest, generally agreeing with the uncertainty described above. But here's the detail that deserves real attention, because it's the kind of small shift that can completely rewrite a forecast. If that area of low pressure tracks even 100 miles farther east than currently expected, that single, relatively modest shift could be enough to turn Monday from a quiet day into a major severe weather event across the Midwest. 100 miles might sound like a lot, but on the scale of a continental weather system, it's a small adjustment, well within the normal range of forecast uncertainty at that range. That's exactly why this is being watched so closely heading into the back half of this week. The ingredients for a serious, multi-day severe weather event are already in place. What's still uncertain is exactly where the trigger lands. So here's where all of this leaves us. What started today as a single 12 to 24 hour severe weather event stretching from the plains to the East Coast is actually the opening chapter of a much longer, much more dangerous pattern. Tonight and tomorrow bring the threat of another powerful, fast-moving line of thunderstorms capable of producing destructive, near-hurricane-force wind gusts across the Central Plains. Wednesday and Thursday bring a temporary lull, more isolated, more scattered, less alarming. But that lull is exactly what makes the weekend so dangerous, because it gives the atmosphere time to recharge. By the time Saturday, Sunday, and Monday arrive, an extraordinary amount of instability will be sitting across the heart of the country, and all it will take is the right area of low-pressure tracking through at the right time to turn that stored energy into a genuine, large-scale, severe weather outbreak. This is the nature of an active weather pattern like this one. It doesn't announce itself with a single dramatic headline and then disappear. It builds in waves, each one shifting slightly in location and intensity, each one feeding off the energy left behind by the last. Today's storms across the plains and the East Coast are not an isolated event. They are the first car on a much longer train, one that's already showing signs of picking up speed as it rolls toward a weekend that could end up defining this entire stretch of the season. Stay alert, watch how these systems evolve day by day, and understand that the forecast for next Monday is still being written by a low-pressure system that, right now, hasn't even finished crossing into the country. And that uncertainty is exactly why this pattern deserves more attention than a typical week of storms. Most severe weather setups come and go in a day or two. This one is stacking, one system feeding into the next across a stretch of nearly 10 days. That kind of extended multi-wave pattern is rare, and it's the reason meteorologists keep using words like active and favorable again and again when they talk about this stretch of June. Those words sound mild on their own, but in this context, they mean something much bigger. They mean the atmosphere is primed repeatedly to turn ordinary thunderstorms into something far more destructive. Think about what that means for the people actually living inside these target zones. A farmer in central Kansas isn't just dealing with one bad afternoon of weather. He's looking at a week where, on any given evening, a wall of wind near 80 or 90 miles per hour could roll across his fields without much warning. A family in the suburbs of Tulsa isn't just watching one storm cell on the radar. They're watching a pattern that could send a second, maybe a third, damaging wind event through their neighborhood in the same week. And a household in the Dakotas, heading into the weekend, is sitting underneath a forecast that openly admits the difference between a quiet Sunday and a major tornado outbreak may come down to whether a low-pressure system shifts by a single county's width. This is the part that often gets lost when people glance at a severe weather map for 5 seconds and move on. The lines on that map, the slight risk zones, the level 1 and level 2 outlooks, are not fixed predictions carved in stone. They are best estimates based on where the ingredients are expected to come together, and those ingredients are moving targets. A trough that nudges slightly farther south. A low-pressure center that strengthens half a day earlier than expected. A line of storms that holds together longer than modeled instead of weakening on schedule. Any one of those small shifts can take a moderate, severe weather day and turn it into an outbreak day, or take what looked like a major outbreak setup and quietly fizzle it into nothing more than gusty wind and a few rumbles of thunder. That's exactly why this forecast has to be treated as a living, evolving picture rather than a single locked-in outcome. The broad strokes are about as certain as forecasting gets at this range. There will be more severe weather. It will affect an enormous stretch of the country. The plains, the Midwest, and the Ohio Valley are going to be in the crosshairs repeatedly over the coming week. But the fine details, exactly which city sees the worst of it, exactly which day produces the headline, tornado outbreak versus the quiet near miss, those details are still being written hour by hour as new data comes in. There's also a bigger pattern worth understanding here, something that goes beyond just this 1 week. Late June into early July is historically one of the most active stretches for this kind of large-scale, multi-day severe weather setup in the central United States. The jet stream is still energetic enough to drive strong upper-level winds, but the surface is already warming up fast, pumping huge amounts of heat and moisture into the lower atmosphere. When those two ingredients overlap, even briefly, the result is often exactly what's being described in this forecast. Explosive instability paired with just enough dynamic lift to turn it into organized, dangerous storms. This is the same general setup responsible for some of the most damaging severe weather events in past summers, when slow-moving complexes of thunderstorms tracked across hundreds of miles of the plains and Midwest, leaving behind extensive wind damage, hail damage, and in the worst cases, long-track tornadoes. That history is part of why this particular stretch deserves real attention instead of being brushed off as just another routine forecast update. The combination of repeated mesoscale convective systems, the kind capable of producing 80 to 100 mile per hour wind gusts, layered on top of a weekend setup with instability values pushing past 6,000 joules per kilogram, is not something that shows up every week of the summer. It shows up during the stretches that end up being remembered, the weeks people look back on months later and say, that was the pattern that produced the big one. None of this is meant to cause panic. It's meant to explain why staying informed over the next several days actually matters in a real, practical way. The difference between a forecast you glance at once and forget, and a forecast you keep checking day by day, can be the difference between getting caught off guard by a sudden severe thunderstorm warning and already knowing, hours in advance, that your area sits in the bullseye for a particular evening. Severe weather like this rarely gives much warning once it's actually bearing down on a community. The warning has to come earlier, in exactly this kind of breakdown, days ahead of time, while there's still room to plan, to prepare, and to pay closer attention as the actual event approaches. So, as this week unfolds, here's the simple version to keep in mind. Today and tonight, the threat is real and immediate, stretching from the plains to the east coast with damaging wind, large hail, and isolated tornadoes all possible. Tonight into tomorrow, a powerful, fast-moving line of storms is likely to tear through the central plains with the potential for destructive, near-hurricane-force wind gusts. Wednesday and Thursday offer a partial break, smaller in scale but still active across the Midwest and High Plains. And then, right as that break ends, the atmosphere reloads for what could be the most significant stretch of the entire pattern, a weekend and start of next week where extreme instability meets the real possibility of an organized severe weather outbreak across the heart of the country. The exact outcome of that final stretch, Saturday through Monday, is still being shaped by a storm system that, as of right now, is still finishing its trip across the Pacific Northwest. Where that system tracks, how fast it moves, and exactly when its strongest winds arrive will determine whether next Monday becomes a footnote in this pattern or the day this entire stretch of severe weather is remembered for. That uncertainty isn't a flaw in the forecast. It's simply the nature of trying to predict something this complex, this far in advance. What's certain is this: the atmosphere over the central and eastern United States is not finished. It's loaded, it's active, and it's going to keep producing rounds of dangerous weather for days to come. The only question left to answer is exactly where and exactly how hard the next blow lands.